Hi BookTube and happy Sunday. I thought I would give a wrap up of sorts of what I've read in January as I'm getting back into the swing of things of making videos. So I have my handy dandy notebook here of I took some notes of what I read, and then I have some favorites to share with you. I'm not going to go over all the books I read just because I feel like it's always hard to do at the end of the month. No matter how little or how much I read in a month, it's just hard to go through all of them. And also, I don't want to go through all of them all the time because they're not all, standouts or favorites or, things like that. Some of them are just books, you read in the moment, and then they just, go by the wayside in a sense. But before I get into the books, I wanted to show you this like really cool bookmarks I got in the mail this week. It was like a belated Christmas gift. And these seem to be kind of, you clip on to like the pages of the book. They weigh down. I'm not sure if they slide off really easy or how good of a clamp they are. But we'll see. I've never used bookmarks like this, but if you have, let me know. Are these I'm just worried they would either slide off really easily, or they would like be too weighty for the page or heavy for the page and like tear it or something. I don't know. We'll see what I think of these. But all my like concerns aside, it was a nice gift. And this one in particular reminds me of my previous cat, Winnie. And Winnie is the picture I have on my YouTube account, because when I first started making BookTube videos, she was always right beside me all the time. Whether I was making videos or not, she was always either beside me or on my lap, and so she was in a lot of my videos. So yeah, this one in particular is a Winnie cat, a Winnie bookmark. So happy to have this gift. Okay, so going into the statistics just a little bit. I didn't go all out on that. Oh, but that reminds me, like, sorry again for the tangent, but just this year, I decided to give, sorry, my dog's over here, so you might hear her, I'm not sure. But I thought I would give Storygraph a try. I have used Goodreads since 2015, 2014, something like that. And I had an account before that. I used it here and there. It wasn't until around like 14 or 15 that I started to dedicate time into tracking all the books. But I've heard so many things about Storygraph that I thought I would give it a go. But yeah, all that being said, even though I tracked all the books I read in January, I didn't use it to make these statistics, and I should have. Now that I'm talking about it out loud, it probably would give me like interesting data, because in looking at the graph, I'm sure some of you are familiar with Storygraph. It's similar to Goodreads, and you can track what you're currently reading or want to read, and you can make your own categories of things like you can in Goodreads. But Storygraph differs in a way in that it can make these different graphs of how many pages you read or how many books, and you can put it into a bar graph or a line graph, and there's like different pie charts for genres and different themes of the book. So I haven't like dedicated into committing myself to Storygraph, but I thought I would give it a go. So I need to like note to myself that next month I need to give that a try, and like maybe, I don't know, show a picture of my February on that instead of having this notebook. So yeah, anyway, yeah, digression aside, I read 19 books, and 4 of the books were rereads. I read 16 fiction books and 3 nonfiction. 3 of the books were ones that I owned off my shelf, and then 16 were digital. So some were audio, but almost all of them were ebooks in that category. Okay, so then to get into, we'll start with the physical books that I read. And like I said, I'm not gonna go through all 19 books I read, but I thought since I only have 3 books on my shelf, that would be an easy place to start. And the first book I read this month, and the first book for 2026, was 84 Charing Cross Road by Helen Hance. And I read this as part of it felt like a BookTube wide reading event. I will leave a link in the description below to the people who are, I think it was Jen over at Jen's Reading Life, I think is our channel name. But I'll double check that and put a link in the description. But she was hosting a live show where she was reading this book, and it's short enough. This edition is, let me see here, 97 pages. So it's short enough, and they're all letters that you could feasibly read it all while doing a live show. And so I've reread this book 10 years ago or so. And this is either my second or my third reread, and I can't exactly remember. I think it's just my second reread. But this is a book about just a devoted reader, and she is corresponding, and this is a nonfiction book, I haven't mentioned that, but she's corresponding with a bookshop in London, because while she's living in New York City, she's not able to find, or maybe at a reasonable price, books that fit her specific niche of the type of books she likes to read. And so she gets in touch with the bookstore on 84 Charing Cross Road, and they had this like correspondence that lasts from, let me see here, the first letter she wrote was in 1949, and then the very last letter is 1969. So yeah, 20 years. And so they of course they build a friendship with the different people. She makes a friendship with one man in particular, but then she gets to know so many of the people, the booksellers, and there's some about their family life, and so it's just a wonderful book to read. And even though some of the books she talks about aren't to my interest, I still had to look the books up that she was mentioning and hunting down just to see what these books were about. And I love this cover. I recently purchased this on a trip when I was in California, because previously I read, I think it was an old library edition with a completely different cover, but I really like this one. This one like speaks to what the book is about. And then yes, that was really fun to do. I joined the live show in the comments towards the end of the live stream, but it was nice to, as a whole community, to get together and read the same book. I thought it was a fun way to start the year. And then two of the other physical books I read was Little Farm in the Ozarks by Roger Lee McBride. This is book 2 in the Rose of Years, the name of the series. Let me see. This is the Rocky Ridge Years. And so this is following Laura Ingalls Wilder and her family, in particular her daughter Rose, when they are making their life in the Ozarks of Missouri. And I had recently talked about the Little House Readathon that I will be co-hosting with Elizabeth over at Lizzie Faye Loves Books in February. But I have been making my way through these generational saga books all through 2025 into 2026, and now I'm on this is the last of those generational books. But this was really interesting. It's interesting to see her, Laura and Rose's life after the Little House on the Prairie series ends. I don't know, I was always curious about that as a kid, because the series ends with Laura and Almanzo getting married and starting their life together in South Dakota. But from reading biographies of her and whatnot, her life doesn't end there. And so it's interesting to see it through the fictionalized version, what it's like. And a lot of this, of course, it's like historical fiction, because it's based on real life events. In fact, Roger Lee McBride is considered, I think Rose adopted him, or there's some kind of connection there between them two. I think she adopted him, or I know for sure he inherited the entire estate of Laura and Rose's inheritance. So yeah, there's for sure kind of connection between the two of them. But yeah, this was interesting to read. And then I read Remembering the Good Times by Richard Peck. And I've read many Richard Peck books because he often writes amusing, humorous, kind of ironic children's books. There's always some kind of black humor in a way, but not so dark where it goes over my head or puts me off. There's one in particular about a librarian, and there's another one about a graveyard or a church that was really interesting. But this one is completely different than all of the other Richard Peck books I've read. And the other ones were more around age 12 or so. So maybe that's the difference, because this one is focusing on the high school years of these three friends. And let's see, there's Buck, Kate, and Trav. And so they're some of them are neighbors, and Trav, and hold on, let me see here. Buck and Kate are neighbors, and so they get to be friends or get to know each other before high school. And then when they enter high school, Trav shows up because there's this whole like suburb of like these elite rich kids that are all of a sudden coming to this little town, whereas no one else has lots of money. These people that are coming in have tons of money, so there's this like whole like, you know, class divide. But Trav makes friends with them, but he has his own problems, even though it isn't money. And so it takes like a lot of, not like it's several of Richard Peck's children's books, how they can have a dark element to them. This one for sure has a dark element, with it being a teenage book. I've read like this book came out in the 80s. Like I've read other books during this time, these like older like YA books, young adult books that have like, you know, really dark things in them. But this was just surprising considering the author, but it was still really well done. And I don't want to give anything away in case you wanted to read it, but it's basically, you know, their friendship and growing up in this small town, and it seems like it would be somewhere in the Midwest, because I think the author himself grew up in like Illinois or something. But this old like Dell paperback doesn't have anything about the author. It just ends, and then that's it. Okay, so then we'll go to some of the ebooks that I read. Let me see here. Oh, and like side note, as I opened up my pictures, I know I took a video clip and put of the cat in my previous video, but since I just opened my photo album, I thought I would show the cat again. He was all sprawled out in my lap, and so he was just so cute. I really like he reminds like a tiger with all these stripes. I haven't had an orange cat in a very long time, and I know a lot of them look, you know, very similar, but I'm just like, he looks like a Bengal tiger. But yeah, he's doing well. For those that are wondering, I mentioned how, for those who didn't watch my previous video, a cat showed up on my doorstep a week and a half ago or so, literally at my doorstep. And so I took him in to see if I could figure out who he belonged to, but he seems to have been just either dropped off here or was abandoned and someone pushed him out in the apartment. I don't know. So, but there's no one claiming him, so I'm just trying to figure out, you know, like, is this like a good time in my life to take on a cat, or do I need to you know, find another home for him? I haven't necessarily decided yet. He's right now, for the moment, he's just adjusting to being here, because he's very much he's been on out in the wilds for at least the last 3 weeks. So he's very much, he's not a feral cat, but he has a lot of outdoorsy cat things going on. He's because I've had like 6 or 8 cats in my life. So this is the first cat where he acts a bit different than the other ones, for sure. And I know all cats are unique, but there's for sure some wildness in him. But I'm just like trying to see how he gets along with Fable, and if he can, you know, fit in well here. And then again, do I have the space and the time to you know, randomly get a cat? Because it's not like I went out and intentionally, you know, purchased a cat or adopted a cat, you know. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, he's very cute. So anyway, going back to the books, now I flipped over to the next picture. I just thought I would mention, this wasn't a favorite of mine, but the author is a favorite of mine. This is Shirley Jackson, Come Along With Me. And I just wanted to mention this book because this is a short story collection that included her last work, Come Along With Me. It's unfinished. It only has like five or so chapters about a widow. But I wanted to mention this book because this completes me reading all of Shirley Jackson's work, and it took me longer than I would have thought, but I purposely stretched out her books over a long period of time, and I in fact reread many of her books before finishing this last one here. But I was kind of like savoring it in a way, because like she's one of my absolute favorite authors. She wrote The Lottery and The Haunting of Hill House, books like that. We've Always Lived in the Castle. Those are her 3 primary known work, but almost all of her books are fantastic. I should say all of her books are fantastic. You know, some of the short stories, you know, are better than others, but all of them, there's always something that makes you stop and think in each of them. And so moving on to the next one, we have Lord of the Flies. This is a graphic novel it's William Golding is the author, and then it's adapted and illustrated by Amy DeJong. And so I wanted to mention this one because for anyone who's read Lord of the Flies or who's interested in reading it, I feel like this graphic novel would be a great place to start. It was beautifully illustrated, even though the story isn't all that beautiful. It was well worth the like 30 minutes it took me to read it, for sure. And you know, I don't necessarily want to go revisit that book, but I was happy to revisit through this. And it won. It's the book of the year by the Times, Guardian, and the Observer. So I'm not the only one who thinks it's really well done. And then moving to my favorite reread of the month. My favorite fiction for the month is Heaven to Betsy by Maud Hart Lovelace. This is also a reread. And this is, I didn't write it down, but I want to say book 4 or 5 in the Betsy Tacy series. And I read through this series for the first time back in 2019, I think. So it's been a good long while since I reread the series. And that was the first time I read it in 2019. And I just fell in love with the series, especially, you know, around this time in the series. But this is when Betsy is becoming more of a young adult and is making friends in high school outside of her, like her neighborhood childhood friends. She's starting to make friends with, you know, these like these groups. She calls them the group. I think yeah. I can't remember now what she calls it. I think she calls it the group. That they're always getting together at people's houses and having dances with her sister playing the piano. And this is following, it's in the Deep Valley in Minnesota, and it takes place, I feel like, in the early 1900s. And so it has this like old-timey feel to it, and it's very charming. And I really like this cover. I wish I had the books in this kind of with this kind of cover, but I just read it on ebook. And then the next book I read reread, it was Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. This was for another booktube event, and I can't remember who hosted this event, but I saw a bunch of people talk about reading Sense and Sensibility. So I was like, okay, I can get on board. I don't need much convincing to reread a Jane Austen. This isn't necessarily one of my top favorites of Jane Austen's, but it's still a really good book and well worth the time in rereading it. And this is following two sisters who are in a way disinherited from their house, like a lot of Jane Austen's books, where they get kind of like shoved out the door, well, because their father dies, and the brother takes it all, and he has a very interesting wife who, you know, she wants to keep all the money. And so the three sisters, I always think that, you know, there's two sisters, but actually there's three, but there's two that are the main sisters, Eleanor and, well, I can't remember her name, Marianne. But yeah, they move out and are just, you know, having to make do with what they have with their mother. And then, you know, it's their finding, you know, the men in their life and getting through all the emotions and things that go along with it. And then how they, you know, overcome that hurdle of, you know, losing everything they had, basically. And then, let's see, the next one, it was interesting for me to read. Same as like the Richard Peck, where it's, you know, where I've known him from the children's books. This is Beverly Cleary, and this is one of her young adult books that was I don't know what year this came out, but judging by the cover, I would say maybe the 80s as well. This is Jean and Johnny, and this is part of the Young Love series. I had no idea that Beverly Cleary wrote young adult. I've read her autobiographies, and I've read all of her children's books. You know, she's famous for the Ramona Quimby series. But I was like, I was very intrigued when I found out that she wrote young adult. And there's, I think, 5 or 6 books in this Young Love series, and this is book 3 or 4. And this is the little clip here, the little paragraph says, sometimes being in love can make you feel mixed up, because this is following Jean, who is obsessed with the boy, and he's very popular and cocky, and he's friends with everyone, but also you can tell from how he's described how he's very superficial, and she is very much more in love with him than he is with her. And so, you know, of course, you can see how that plays out. But I love the cover with the locker room. My cover didn't look like this, but I want to hunt these out because Beverly Cleary writes fantastic children's books, and these are really interesting. The first one I read, I can't remember the name of this series, it did not have a happy ending at all. And so she doesn't write, you know, the typical YA. You know, she has her own way of writing these books, I feel like. And then another booktube event I was participating in is the Harlequin author spotlight that Sarah over at, what is her channel name? Category Romance Reader? Again, I'll leave a link in the description below to her channel. She used to be the Bookish knitter, and then she changed her channel to focus on category romance. But she's picking one author per month that she wants to focus on. So this is Terry Wilson, and I read The Art of Us, and I also read The Perfect Pass, one of her more recent releases. This is an older one. I think it came out in like 2015 or so. And now that I'm thinking about it, this one wasn't a Harlequin. This was a special edition. So technically I only read one Harlequin book by Terry Wilson, but I've read many of her books. She writes very sweet and charming, and the women are often very bubbly and like cotton candy-esque, where they're like, you know, they like wearing glitter and makeup and have like the blonde curly hair, and the dresses and things like that is typically the kind of stories that she writes. And this one is no different. This is following an author, and she is teaching an art class and meets a man who seems to know a thing or two about art, even though he doesn't come from a career of it. And so it's their relationship and things like that. But this one wasn't my favorite of Terry Wilson. I've read many of her books. In particular, I really liked A Christmas Charms, and I really liked, there's like a New York Bridal trilogy that was fantastic. I loved that one. Like, I know one of the books in that series is Merry and Bright, but that was just utterly charming. Whereas this one, for some reason, it just missed the mark. Same as this one, unfortunately, Perfect Pass, one of her newest books. This is about a journalist who was writing for the sports columns, and she is interviewing and observing a football player who got injured, and so he is now coaching a team in like small town Texas that's all about football. But both of them just missed the mark for me, and I don't know necessarily why. Maybe I just wasn't in the mood for them, because Terry Wilson, I haven't not liked any of, I mean, I've liked all of her books, but like these two, I liked them enough, but didn't love them. I don't know. It was just like, it was almost too sweet. It was too eye rolly for me, if that makes sense. It was just too overdone. But again, take my opinion with a grain of salt, because I know this one particularly, this was a new release, and so a lot of people have talked about liking this book. But I just think maybe I was just in the wrong mood when I read it. But happy to have participated in the event. And I think the next book for February is an author I have known nothing about. Whereas like I said, Terry Wilson, I've read at least 10 of her books, and I've liked all of them. So I feel like I need to give these to another try at some point. When I'm I don't know, feeling better, because like I mentioned my last video, I should say it again just in case you didn't watch that one, is just I've been going through a lot of stressful events in my life recently, because I'm just now getting back on BookTube after being away since September, October, something like that, because work just got way over my head, and I just didn't have the time or the energy to read many books, or much less talk about them. So maybe that had something to do with my mood of not wanting to read the super sweet and charming, and I mean, and these books still had some hard-hitting moments. Don't get me wrong on that. It's just the budding romance it was just sickening for me in a sense. but in a way, yeah, like I said, her writing, it's fine. I think it's me. Yeah. Anyway, so I feel like I've over explain myself there. But yeah, so those were the books I wanted to focus on. I wanted to focus on explaining to you the physical books and some of my favorite or standout books for the month of January. All the other books I read were mostly, like I had mentioned, like mysteries and thrillers, and things like that, and some other books mixed in. But hopefully in February I will do a better job of sharing all the books I read, because I feel like if I do it on a weekly basis, it's more digestible than just giving you it all in one video at the end of the month. It's just too overwhelming for me, and it puts me off, because I know, like, if I was watching a video, I don't know if I would want to sit through, you know, sharing like 20 or 30 books, because then it's hard to film it all in, you know, a short amount of time. Or otherwise it'd be like an hour. But also, if I do it in a short amount of time, I feel like I'm not giving the books, you know, the time that they that they deserve. So anyway, I will let you go, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks, BookTube.